However, it's not only discrimination in the same way, especially in the West, because that's what I specialize in. You know, I'm so grateful that I have readers anywhere. I'm grateful. I think every writer wants to have readers. And I think for me, having an accurate translation with a strong story is really beneficial for the reader, and it means so much to me as a writer. So I'm really grateful for this new translation and this opportunity to share the book with a bigger audience. Well, I'm a very political person. So I wrote it because I was interested in colonialism and imperialism, racism, sexism. I was very interested in how this works. And I'm also interested in war and the impact it has in generations. But if I write a book that's just about those political ideas, it's really boring. So I had to make it a family story. So in a way, every novelist who is political, in a way, is kind to trick you. How do I make you care about these very, very serious issues? I have to give it interest. And the interest is by making it a human story. And the human story is about a family. One of the things that I love about ordinary people is that even if important, powerful people don't care about us, or if the world is unfair, we have to say inside, but no matter. 무슨 상관, right? 상관없다. And I'm going to do it anyway. And that feeling of defiance is wonderful. And if you don't have that feeling of defiance, a kind of rebellion, it's very hard to live. And I wanted to honor that in my first sentence, because when I studied the history of the 제일교포 and all the unfairness they lived through for such a long time, even now, what really impressed me is how did they keep going? And it's because inside, even at great risk, they felt, but no matter. I must keep living. I must take care of my family. And I thought it was very beautiful. Part of that is because you're a man. Men are stronger. People attack men. I think that the way Koreans are perceived in the world, especially in the West, because that's what I specialize in, is such a limited and narrow and stereotypical way. So I am actively engaged in fighting these very dumb, stupid descriptions of Koreans. And what's worse is I often find other Koreans saying, oh, we are this way, we are this way. So I'm the last person who's going to say there's one word that describes Koreans perfectly. So when I was asked this question, what are Koreans like? A European journalist asked me this question, what are Koreans like? And I thought that was such a funny question, because if you know Koreans, we're so complicated and everybody's so different. I could find 10 people on the subway in Korea and each person will have a different nose, right? Instead of saying, oh, Koreans all look alike. So I said, oh, well, Korean people like to dance. And they looked at me like, what do you mean Korean people like to dance? And I said that just to be funny, because of course you can't say one thing about Koreans, because we're human beings and every human being is different. So I think in terms of national characteristic, what I can say is we have a certain history, and that history has affected us. interviewed so many women, and I also interviewed many sons. So when the sons who are your age talk about their mothers and their grandmothers, they always said, oh, they didn't talk that much, but they were very strong, and sometimes stronger than my father. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. And the more people that I meet, I realize you have a conventional behavior. Like right now, you and I are being very polite because we are civilized citizens who are professionals, right? But inside we might be afraid, we might be angry, we might be brokenhearted, but you can't show that all the time. But what tests character is when you have a crisis. So when you, as a fiction writer, you always have to say, well, you and I may be very nice and funny and interesting regularly, but in a crisis, what are you like? And that tests the character. And as a fiction writer, I always have to test my characters. So if your husband is imprisoned, what would you do to take care of your 2 children? And Sanja didn't even know herself. Oh, can I stand in a shijang and say, kimchi, to sell kimchi? I mean, it's so crazy. But if you love your children, would you do that? I think so. When I studied anthropologists who really researched this field, many Korean mothers made alcohol in their house and sold it because they had no other choice in the Jeilgyopo community, the first generation. Their children would go and collect garbage and they would feed it to the pigs that they grew in their own house. They raised pigs in their own house. They slept with pigs. And then when they made the alcohol and they sold it, they would always get arrested because it was illegal. And after you come out of jail, do you know what they did? They would sell it again because they have to feed their children. So when I look at that situation, I think, I understand because I'm a mother, I have a son, and I remember when my husband lost his job in 2017 and my son had to go to college, I remember thinking, what will I do? Because the tuition was so terrifying. And I remember thinking, oh, I have to work much harder because I have to pay for this tuition. So I didn't expect to have that happen, but when a crisis happened to me, I had to become a different person. And that was actually very helpful for me to think about being a writer.
What made you think Korean are attractive?
Of course, yeah. I've won once.
Right there.
I have to say that I am not much of a pachinko player. I only played for research, but I have been to many pachinko parlors. I have been in the back offices. I have interviewed people who own pachinko parlors, who work in pachinko parlors, the girls who stand behind the counter and give gifts. I've done all of that, and it's not my type of thing. It is a form of gambling, but it was often the only place that most men could get jobs because there was so much discrimination. So imagine if you would go to, let's say, Waseda University. You are Korean, you go to Japan, you study really hard, and you go to Waseda University. And you say, I want to be a journalist. And then they say in all the newspapers, we don't hire Koreans. So all that work was for nothing. And then you end up working in pachinko, a place you don't want to work. And for me, that was so interesting. And I thought, I will not look down at pachinko if that is where my ancestors worked, if that was the only choice they had to feed their families and put housing. And worse, during certain aspects of the 20th century, certain local governments refused to allow laborers, even people who dug roads, to work more than a certain number of days. Because if they worked extra number of days, then they would have a regular job. So they intentionally only gave you 3 or 4 days of work, not 6 or 7, which meant that they had to have supplemental income. And then the wives would make things like alcohol. Am I going to look down at a woman who makes alcohol illegally at home or works in a pachinko parlor for her husband? No, I refuse to do that. So I wanted to be fair and say, with what you are allowed, how can you live? And one of the things that many people in Japan did is to work in pachinko parlors. All of my thousands of interviews, and I was trying to wonder, like, what is the thing that Koreans care about? So the question is, what do they really care about? And I realized, oh, they really care about education. Every interview I ever had with a Korean person, whether from Brazil or Canada or Argentina or Germany or Australia, they had such a strong opinion. And I'm not saying they're saying education is good or bad, but they had this sort of intense response. It was very emotional. So I thought, oh, I want to write a book about education and what it means to Koreans around the world. So what is the central metaphor in this novel? And it's hagwon. Because a hagwon, in many ways, is just a private place where you learn how to do something else. But it's based on a wish to become smarter. That's it. And once I figured that out, I started to say, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen in this book. So I needed to find the metaphor in the same way Pachinko was a metaphor for my other book.